Hello and welcome. In this video, you are being asked to pay close attention to how your thoughts operate and what really drives you to think in specific ways. You are also being asked to adopt a more conscious relationship with your thoughts, where you break free from identification with them, realizing that they are neither you nor reality. Ultimately, as you are waking up, the aim is to break free from identification completely. Stop relying on your thoughts to guide you and instead let higher faculties take over. So, you can look at this video as a help to see through the unreliable ways that our minds operate, and therefore how the minds take us in all kinds of erroneous, unwanted directions, while giving us the impression that they have everything under control. And also how you can use your thoughts consciously instead of allowing uncontrolled thoughts to dictate your behavior. Formatory thinking, as understood within the Fourth Way tradition, a system of spiritual and psychological development developed by the spiritual teacher and philosopher Gurdjieff, is a concept that deals with the mechanistic, binary nature of thought processes. This form of thinking is marked by its simplicity, rigidity, and lack of nuance. It represents a common state of mental functioning where one is limited to dualistic, black and white perspectives, unable to perceive complexities or subtleties in experience. When one operates through formatory thinking, responses to situations are predictable, repetitive, and governed by pre-existing, often culturally conditioned dichotomies, such as right and wrong, good and bad, and true and false, and the way you've observed these labels being used throughout your life. Now, this is not about abandoning formatory thinking altogether, but learning to use it consciously when necessary. Formatory thinking has its very limited use in repetitive tasks and in any given situation where we are required to respond according to a rehearsed script. This is instead about regaining control over our mental processes and choosing how we respond to the world around us. When analyzing the concept of formatory thinking, you will, if you understand it correctly, get a very tangible sense of how different the quality of your thoughts can be. This realization leads logically to the conclusion that thoughts cannot have anything to do with who you are, even though they can certainly shape your character and contribute greatly to what kind of life you are living. It's a part of the mechanical thinking of the sleeping state, which is described in the Fourth Way teachings. This is the state that most people spend the majority of their lives in, and we have whole videos on it and on mechanical thinking. As always, there are links to them at the end screen. Formatory thinking is very much like a computer running pre-programmed scripts. When specific input is entered, the system processes it through a rigid, predefined algorithm, producing a predictable output. Similarly, in formatory thinking, external stimuli trigger habitual mental responses based on prior conditioning, leaving no room for creativity or deeper understanding. Just as a computer cannot deviate from its code without reprogramming, a person stuck in formatory thinking cannot perceive nuances until they consciously rewrite their mental patterns. This mode of thought is primarily associated with the lower centers of human functioning as described within the Fourth Way. The four centers are the intellectual, emotional, moving, and instinctual, where the two last are sometimes grouped together. There's a link to a whole video on the topic of centers at the end screen. We are here primarily dealing with the intellectual center, specifically when it is not operating at its full potential. Within this framework, the intellectual center has an important function in distinguishing and analyzing information, but when constrained to formatory thinking, it becomes superficial and unproductive. Instead of engaging in genuine thought or contemplation, the mind reflexively categorizes and judges, bypassing deeper understanding. One of the best examples of formatory thinking is when we label or categorize certain groups of people, views, ideas, theories, philosophies, etc., thereby thinking that we've understood and said something meaningful about that, or those that we have labeled or categorized. We may say that this type of person is this or that way, while we only have very little actual exposure to individuals of that category, or maybe we even just have secondhand information. An example of formatory thinking in action could be a discussion about shortening the number of hours one works in a week. One might give all kinds of reasonable arguments for it, while simply being met with, "Only lazy people want to work less." A statement such as this ignores all the nuances of the topic at hand and basically dismisses it without any conscious reflection. Of course, the argument could be reversed. Someone advocating for fewer hours might hear reasonable arguments against the idea. Instead of engaging with these points, they respond dismissively. "You only want long work weeks because you're obsessed with profits and don't care about people's well-being." This does not mean that both perspectives are equally valid. Interestingly enough, both persons could find arguments for why they stand for the realistic alternative. The point is only that if you discuss a topic with someone who presents a different perspective, formatory thinking would cause an automatic, mechanical reaction of dismissing their viewpoint instead of engaging with it thoughtfully. This response bypasses any deeper examination of the underlying reasons for the disagreement, and the opportunity for mutual learning is lost. Basically, it's a type of thinking, and consequently responding, that is divorced from reality. It's just words and images, giving the impression of saying something meaningful. By contrast, transcending formatory thinking would involve recognizing that disagreements often stem from different perspectives or experiences, and approaching them with curiosity and openness. This shift requires a conscious effort to observe and interrupt the habitual patterns of categorization and judgment. Keeping this at the back of your mind will also help you become a more active listener, as opposed to someone who just waits for their turn to speak, so they can tell the other person how things really are. This does not mean that we have to become relativists all of a sudden. As just touched upon, there are of course views that rest on a more solid foundation than others, and the vigilance towards formatory thinking will actually help making sure that what you stand for in general does. And on the other hand, you can easily find examples of how formatory thinking dominates many of the issues in the public sphere today. In fact, the limitations of formatory thinking often manifest in debates or discussions where participants rely on fixed opinions, repeating ideas they have absorbed without questioning or understanding them. This type of thought fosters arguments and conflicts, as it lacks the capacity for synthesis or empathy. One sees the world in stark contrasts, unable to reconcile or integrate opposing perspectives. This type of formatory thinking also spreads within groups of like-minded people and is part of the explanation for certain political or religious movements or other systems of opinions and beliefs where free thinking is discouraged. We instead need to recognize the complexity of the world if we want to eliminate wrongful use of formatory thinking. This means taking a flexible approach to different ideas and worldviews, and being able to consider two opposite ideas at the same time without drawing any final conclusions, even with regard to subjects that matter to us. Many of us have been taught to value a consistent worldview and cohesive beliefs. While it may seem beneficial to strive to eliminate contradictions on some levels, closer examination reveals that this is neither how reality functions nor how the mind operates. Instead, we find that while an objective reality may exist, it is not the reality we directly experience. Furthermore, in our current era, we are uncovering that reality, whatever it may be, is vastly different from what we once believed. We seldom have access to enough facts to be nearly as certain as we would like to be, and our minds have a tendency to convince us that things we don't have close to enough evidence for to justify any kind of certainty are facts. On top of that, we view the little information we have access to through our subjective filters. These would be that which is tied to our identities, such as our belief systems, beliefs, and opinions. And those are often of the rigid, inflexible kinds that are characteristic of formatory thinking. A practical challenge to overcoming formatory thinking lies in recognizing its pervasive influence. The formatory mind is comfortable because it provides quick answers and a sense of certainty. In this, self-observation, a key practice within the fourth way, is the first step towards liberation. To break free, we need to first become aware of how we think and say the same types of things over and over again. Furthermore, we also need to recognize how we go through the same routines day in and day out, and how this creates basically the same experiences over and over again. Through observing one's own mechanical responses and habitual patterns, one can begin to understand how deeply formatory thinking permeates daily life. We have a whole video on self-observation as well, and there will be a link to it at the end screen. Self-observation involves consciously monitoring our thoughts, emotions, and actions without judgment. It is not about suppressing or changing these aspects of ourselves, but simply observing them as they arise. It is important to cultivate the habit of observing what is going on inside without getting sucked into identification with the content of the mind. Through self-observation, we can begin to recognize the automatic nature of formatory thinking. We see how certain situations trigger specific reactions and how our identification with these reactions keeps us locked in repetitive patterns. In summary, formatory thinking within the fourth way tradition represents the habitual binary nature of thought, which limits perception and understanding. It arises from the mechanical functions of the intellectual center and is characterized by rigidity, predictability, and an inability to handle complexity. Overcoming formatory thinking requires conscious effort, self-observation, and the development of higher centers that enable integrated, flexible, and nuanced approaches to life. By moving beyond this constrained mode of thought, one can access deeper levels of awareness and understanding, aligning with the transformative aims of the fourth way. Escaping the constraints of habitual thought involves aligning the mind, emotions, and body in a unified effort, cultivating a balanced and responsive state of being. It bears repeating that recognizing that the mind operates in this manner may take a long time. And once it clicks, it can be daunting to recognize that formatory thinking has been dominating a significant portion of your thinking for a long time, which it has if you're like most people. But the first crucial step has already been taken. Just bringing more awareness towards aspects of your inner life begins to shift it. It's also important to note that this is not about watching your mind constantly, even if you are encouraged to direct your attention towards your inner life as much as you are able to. But as you're waking up to more and more of who you are, it becomes more and more natural for you to release these dysfunctional, automatic patterns. So this is more intended as a help to see through what is going in your present moment experiences, to see how tricky your mind can be. But ultimately, this is about surrendering all of this as you recognize your true nature as part of infinite consciousness. This is what awaits on the other side of the process of de-identifying with all of the things that you are not, with all of the thoughts, beliefs, opinions, and attitudes that you formed an identity around, which, of course, includes the rigid ideas that are tied to formatory thinking. In other words, while it can be useful to reprogram the mind and the thinking processes to operate better and let go of dysfunctional ways of thinking, the ultimate aim is to let all of it go and surrender to the fact that you are part of something infinitely more powerful than your little ego mind. Again, one way of doing this is to uncover all of the faulty thinking that we erroneously have confused with who we are. You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.